I've been holding this story inside for years, but recent events have made me realize I need to share it. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through something similar. It's long, so I'll break it into parts. Growing up, everything in my life revolved around reputation. My parents were both teachers at Riverside Prep, one of those prestigious private schools where politicians and CEOs send their kids. Mom taught AP English, Dad was head of the mathematics department, and their status at the school was everything to them. "Cindy, remember who you are," Mom would say whenever I did anything slightly out of line. "You're a teacher's daughter. People are always watching." I can't count how many times I heard that phrase growing up. It was like a mantra in our house, right up there with "straight A's aren't an achievement, they're an expectation, and your behavior reflects on all of us." I was their only child, their perfect little project. They monitored everything, my grades, my friends, my clothes, even my posture at dinner parties. Looking back, I should have seen the signs of how controlling they were, but when you're raised in that environment, it all seems normal. Things really started looking up in my junior year of high school, when I began dating James Mitchell. His father owned half the real estate in our city's downtown, and his mother was on the school board. My parents were ecstatic. "This is exactly the kind of connection we've been hoping for," Mom told me one night while I was doing homework. "The Mitchells are such a respectable family. And James is so focused on his future." Dad nodded along, adding, "Just think, Cindy. If things work out, you could have such a wonderful life ahead of you." James and I actually got along great at first. He was smart, funny, and seemed to understand the pressure of having parents with high expectations. We'd spend hours talking about our plans for the future. He wanted to go into commercial real estate like his father, and I was planning to become a financial analyst. "We could be such a power couple," he'd say, half joking, but not really. The real estate mogul and his brilliant financial advisor wife. Our parents loved to get together for dinner, planning our futures while we sat there, nodding and smiling. Everything was perfect on the surface. Just like they wanted it. I graduated as valedictorian, got accepted into Winston College's prestigious business program, and started my freshman year with James at the same school. Our parents couldn't have been prouder. They'd achieved their goal. Their daughter was on track for the perfect life they'd planned. College life started out exactly as planned. James and I both threw ourselves into our studies at Winston, and everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. My business analytics professors praised my work, and I was maintaining that perfect GPA my parents expected. James and I spent most of our free time together, and our relationship grew more serious. By the middle of sophomore year, we'd become intimate. It felt like a natural progression. We'd been dating for almost 3 years at that point, and we talked about marriage after graduation like it was a foregone conclusion. I was 19, in love, and thought I had it all figured out. Then came the morning sickness. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just stress or a stomach bug. But after 2 weeks of running to the bathroom between classes, I couldn't deny it anymore. I bought 3 different pregnancy tests from a pharmacy across town, not wanting to risk running into anyone I knew. I still remember sitting on my dorm room floor, staring at those little pink lines. Positive. All 3 of them. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely text James to come over. "You're what?" His face went pale when I told him. No. This can't be happening. Not now." "I know it's not ideal timing," I said, trying to stay calm. "But we can figure this out together. We've always talked about having a family eventually." "Eventually," James cut me off. "Yeah, after college, after I've taken over Dad's business, after we're married and established. Not now. Do you know what this would do to my future?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "What about our future?" "There's only one solution here," he said, pacing my small dorm room. "You need to get an abortion. We can't have a baby now. It would ruin everything." "No," I said firmly. "I won't do that. This is our child." "My parents will cut me off if they find out about this," he interrupted. Everything I've worked for will be gone. You can't do this to me, Cindy. But someone had already done it to me. While James and I were arguing, my phone started buzzing. My mom's name flashed on the screen. Come home, now. Her voice was ice cold. We need to discuss this situation. I felt sick. How did you? James called his parents. They called us. Come home immediately or we'll come get you ourselves. The drive home was the longest 2 hours of my life. When I walked through my parents' front door, I found both sets of parents waiting for me. The look of disgust on their faces made me want to disappear. How dare you? My mother's voice shook with rage. How dare you disgrace us like this? You stupid, stupid girl, my father spat out. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation at school? Mrs. Mitchell was crying dramatically. Our James has such a bright future ahead of him. He can't be tied down with a baby now. I'll raise the baby myself, I said, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach. I don't expect anything from James or any of you. A single mother? My mother laughed bitterly. Our daughter, a single mother? Is that what we raised? A little whore who spreads her legs and ruins her life? We won't allow it, my father declared. We will not have our reputation destroyed by your irresponsible behavior. Reputation? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is your grandchild we're talking about. No, Mrs. Mitchell said firmly. This is a mistake that needs to be corrected. James has his whole life ahead of him. This thing would ruin everything. The discussion went on for hours. It wasn't really a discussion though, it was more like a coordinated attack. Think about your future, Cindy, my father kept saying. How do you plan to support a child? Where will you live? We won't continue paying for your education if you insist on keeping it, my mother added. Is that what you want? To throw away your entire future? I sat there on our living room couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless hours studying for tests and planning my perfect future. I could get a job, take a break from school. And live where? My mother's voice was sharp. Certainly not here. We won't have you bringing that kind of shame into our home. Maybe one of my aunts. I started, but my voice trailed off. Dad was an only child, and Mom's sisters both lived overseas. I had nowhere to go. James sat silently through most of it, staring at the floor. His parents did all the talking for him. James has an internship lined up with Morgan and Reed Investments next summer, his father kept saying. Do you want to ruin that for him? Is that how little you care about his future? They wore me down, bit by bit. Every plan I suggested was shot down. Every possibility I brought up was crushed. No job would pay enough. No apartment would be affordable. No future would be possible. Finally, my mother drove me to the clinic herself. The doctor was professional, but concerned during the initial exam. I need to inform you, she said quietly, looking directly at me, that this procedure could impact your ability to conceive in the future. There are potential risks. We've discussed all that, my mother interrupted. We've made our decision. The doctor looked at me. Ms. Thompson, I need to hear from you. Do you understand the risks? I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I recovered physically, returned to Winston for the spring semester, and threw myself into my studies. James tried to talk to me once, mumbling something about how it was for the best, but I walked away mid-sentence. We never spoke again. During spring break, instead of going home, I got a job as a barista at a coffee shop near campus. I picked up shifts during every holiday after that. My parents didn't object, they seemed relieved not to have me around. As long as I maintained my GPA and didn't cause any more problems, they were content to keep paying my tuition. We're glad you finally came to your senses, my mother said during one of our brief phone calls. Everything worked out for the best. But nothing felt like the best. Nothing felt right anymore. I went through the motions, got my assignments done, kept my perfect grades. But something inside me had broken, and I knew it would never be the same. After graduation, I landed a position as a financial analyst at Morgan & Reed Investments. Ironic, considering it was one of the firms James had been so desperate to intern with. But I'd earned my spot on my own merit, graduating summa cum laude and impressing during my interviews. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I buried myself in work, analyzing market trends and building financial models. My apartment became my sanctuary, no judgment, no expectations beyond my own. Then came the night of the company's annual holiday gala. I almost didn't go, but my team leader insisted. "You can't keep hiding behind those spreadsheets forever, Cindy," she said. That's where I met David. He was one of the firm's partners, but not the stuffy, arrogant type I'd expected. He was discussing basketball with the custodial staff when I first saw him, genuinely interested in their March Madness predictions. "I hope I'm not interrupting a serious strategic meeting," I joked, needing to get his signature on some reports. He looked up with the warmest smile I'd ever seen. "Actually, Jose here was just explaining why my bracket is going to be a complete disaster this year." We started dating a month later. David was different from anyone I'd ever known, genuine, kind, and completely unconcerned with status or appearances. When he proposed a year later, it was over takeout Chinese food in my tiny apartment. "I don't need a big wedding," I told him. "Just us." And that's what we did. A simple ceremony at the courthouse, with his sister and best friend as witnesses. No elaborate dresses, no society photographers, no concerned whispers about reputation. Just love and honesty. I didn't tell my parents. By then, we were down to exchanging brief birthday and Christmas texts. They didn't ask about my life, and I didn't volunteer information. Then, 3 years into our marriage, my mother called. "Your father's sick," she said without preamble. "He needs surgery. You should come." David squeezed my hand as we pulled up to my childhood home. It looked exactly the same, perfectly manicured lawn, pristine white trim, not a single thing out of place. My mother's eyes widened when she saw David step out of the car. "Who's this?" "My husband," I said simply. "We've been married for 3 years. What followed was a fascinating transformation. First came the hurt accusations about being excluded from the wedding. But as soon as David mentioned his position as executive director, and they realized I was now a senior financial analyst, their tone completely changed. "Oh, darling, we've missed you so much," my mother gushed, as if the last several years of silence hadn't happened. "You must come visit more often." Then came the real reason for the call. Dad needed expensive surgery, and their insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Could I help? After all, I was doing so well now. I agreed to help with the medical bills. Maybe it was weakness, maybe it was forgiveness, or maybe I just wanted to prove I'd succeeded despite everything. Dad looked genuinely grateful, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe the past could stay in the past. After Dad's recovery, David and I started talking about having a family of our own. We both wanted children, and the timing felt right. But month after month, nothing happened. At first, we tried not to worry. "These things take time," David would say, staying positive. But after a year of disappointment, we decided to see a fertility specialist. Dr. Martinez was kind but thorough. She ran various tests and took a detailed medical history. Then came the question I'd been dreading. "Have you ever had any pregnancies or terminations?" My throat went dry. David didn't know about what had happened in college. I'd never found the right time to tell him. But sitting there in that sterile office, the truth had to come out. "Yes," I whispered. "An abortion. When I was 19. Dr. Martinez nodded professionally, making notes. After reviewing all the test results, she delivered the news that shattered my world. "The termination procedure you had resulted in some complications," she explained gently. "Combined with the scarring that developed afterward, I'm afraid your chances of conceiving are virtually non-existent." I felt the room spin. All those years ago, the doctor at the clinic had warned about risks, but my mother had dismissed them. Now here I was, paying the price for a choice that had never really been mine. That evening, I had to tell David everything. We sat on our back porch, the same spot where we usually planned our future, and I confessed it all: the pregnancy in college, my parents' reaction, the coerced abortion. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed. "I should have told you sooner. I understand if this changes things." David pulled me into his arms, cutting off my words. "Hey, look at me," he said softly. "Nothing could change how I feel about you. Nothing." We sat in silence for a while, his arms around me, before he spoke again. "You know, there are other ways to build a family. We could look into adoption. Give a home to a child who needs one." His words were like a lifeline. We spent that night researching adoption agencies and requirements, making plans for a different kind of future than we'd imagined, but one filled with just as much love. Meanwhile, my newly rekindled relationship with my parents took on an uncomfortable pattern. Every visit included the same question: "So, when are you going to give us grandchildren?" I'd deflect, change the subject, talk about work or Dad's recovery, anything to avoid the truth. They'd already proven they cared more about appearances than their own grandchild once before. I wasn't about to give them another chance to judge my choices. Even though Dad had fully recovered, I kept sending them money every month. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was guilt, or maybe some part of me still hoped that financial success would finally earn their genuine approval. The Thanksgiving invitation came as a surprise. My parents rarely hosted holidays anymore, claiming they were too exhausting. But this year, my mother insisted we come. "We're having a few friends over," she said. "Nothing fancy, just some colleagues from school and their families." I should have known better. When we arrived, the house was packed with at least 30 people, all pillars of the local education community, all part of my parents' carefully curated social circle. The evening started predictably enough. Everyone commented on how successful I'd become, how impressive David's position was, how proud my parents must be. The same shallow conversations I'd grown up with. Then came the moment that changed everything. My mother cornered us by the dessert table, wine glass in hand, speaking just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You know, Cindy, Mrs. Peterson was just showing me pictures of her new grandson. Absolutely adorable. When are you and David going to give us grandchildren? Everyone else our age is already enjoying grandparenthood." Before I could deflect, David squeezed my hand and answered honestly. "Actually, we're looking into adoption. We've already started the application process." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several shades of red before she practically shouted, "Adoption? Have you lost your mind?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. My mother seized the audience's attention like the experienced teacher she was. "Everyone, can you believe this? My daughter, who could give us perfectly good grandchildren of her own, wants to adopt instead." "Mom, please," I hissed. "This isn't the time or place." Dad stormed over from his position by the fireplace. "What's this nonsense about adoption? Are you trying to embarrass us again? Do you have any idea what kind of background these children come from? Drug addicts, criminals, mentally ill parents, is that what you want to bring into this family?" "You're making a scene," I said firmly. "This is a private matter." But the damage was done. My parents' friends, loosened by holiday drinks and encouraged by my parents' reaction, started chiming in. "You really should have your own children, dear," Mrs. Peterson offered. "You never know what you're getting with adopted kids." "My cousin's friend adopted," another guest added. "Terrible mistake. The child had all sorts of problems." "Think about your family legacy," someone else called out. My parents stood there nodding along, clearly pleased that their social circle was backing them up. The same smug expressions they'd worn all those years ago, when they'd had others gang up on me about my pregnancy. Something inside me snapped. "You want to know why we're adopting?" My voice cut through the murmur of judgmental whispers. You really want to know? Fine, I'll tell you all exactly why. The room went deadly quiet. I could see the warning in my mother's eyes, but I was done protecting their reputation. I can't have children because of complications from an abortion I had when I was 19. An abortion that you, both of you, forced me to have because you were more concerned about what the neighbors would think than about your own daughter and grandchild. Someone gasped. Mrs. Peterson's wine glass froze halfway to her mouth. You threatened to kick me out, cut off my education, leave me with nothing unless I took care of the problem, I continued, my voice shaking but clear. The doctor warned there could be complications, but Mom, you remember what you said? We've made our decision. Not me. We. You and Dad and the Mitchells, all deciding what would happen to my body, my baby, my future. I turned to address the shocked faces around the room. So yes, we're adopting. Because thanks to my parents' desperate need to maintain their precious reputation, that's my only option for having a family now. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother did something I should have expected but still caught me off guard. She went on the attack. How dare you, she shrieked. How dare you come into my home and tell such vicious lies? You ungrateful girl. She turned to her guests, hands trembling. She's lying. She's always been troubled, always trying to blame others for her mistakes. She got herself into trouble and had an abortion without even telling us until after the fact. We would never. Are you serious? I cut her off. You're really going to stand there and lie? In front of all these people? David, show them the medical records. My husband pulled out his phone where we'd saved copies of my old medical files, documentation I'd gotten from the clinic for our fertility specialist. But before he could pull them up, my mother completely lost it. Get out, she screamed. Get out of my house right now. You've ruined everything, again. Just like you always do. Get out. As David and I walked to the car, I could hear my mother trying to do damage control inside, her voice high and panicked as she offered more drinks to her guests. My father didn't say a word, he just stood there, silent as always when it really mattered. The drive home was quiet. David held my hand the entire way, not pushing me to talk, just being there. When we finally got home, I went straight to my laptop and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents' account. It took exactly 2 months for my mother to call. I was in the middle of reviewing our home study paperwork for the adoption agency when her name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. But part of me wanted to hear what she could possibly have to say after Thanksgiving. The Petersons withdrew their son from the school, she began without even a hello. Mrs. Chen isn't inviting me to her book club anymore. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? I actually laughed. After everything, she was still only concerned about reputation. Your father and I deserve compensation for this damage you've caused, she continued. The monthly support you were providing barely covers the social costs we're incurring. People are treating us differently at work. We've had to explain things, to make excuses. Excuses? I cut in. You mean lies. Like the lies you told at Thanksgiving? Or the lies you've been telling yourselves all these years about what you did to me? We did what was best for you. And this is how you repay us? By spreading vicious stories and then cutting us off financially? What was best for me? My voice was steady now, calmer than I'd ever been when speaking to her. Do you know what David and I did last week? We met with a therapist who specializes in helping adoptive parents deal with infertility grief. She helped me understand something important. What you did wasn't just about the abortion. It was about control. It's always been about control. Don't you dare. The money was just another form of control, I continued. As long as I was paying you, you felt like you still had power over me. Well, that's done now. I'm done. You ungrateful little. I'm blocking your number after this call, I said. Both of yours. David and I are in the final stages of our adoption home study. In a few months, we'll hopefully be matched with a child who needs a home. A child who will never have to worry about family reputation being more important than their well-being. A child who will be loved unconditionally. You're making a huge mistake, she hissed. When you realize that, don't come crawling back. I ended the call mid-sentence and blocked both their numbers immediately. Then I went back to my adoption paperwork with a lighter heart than I'd had in years. That was 6 months ago. Today, David and I are finishing up the nursery for the baby girl we'll be welcoming next month. Her birth mother chose us specifically because of our story. She wanted her daughter to be raised by parents who understood that love is more important than appearances. Sometimes I think about my parents, about what they're missing out on. But then I remember, they made their choice a long time ago. They chose reputation over love, appearances over family. I'm choosing differently. My daughter will grow up knowing she is wanted, cherished, and accepted exactly as she is. No conditions. No expectations. No concern for what the neighbors might think. Final edit, our daughter is home with us now. She's perfect.